is sort of conceptually following Doug Tallamy's talk. If you weren't able to hear him last Saturday, it's on the Sloat website. He's an academic. He's at the University of Delaware, starting out as a insect guy and entomologist, and now encompassing nature as a whole with lots and lots of connections. And very compelling to make for a robust biodiverse environment. What I wanted to do was have people feel a little more familiar with absolutely beautiful California native plants. So the idea here is, here you have an oak tree outside the art frame, but we want to bring plants to inside to be the focus of something beautiful in your garden. And they may be less expensive than some multi-million-dollar Henry Moore statue, and prettier too. So plants as art. So when you have art, you most of the time frame it, and you want to think about framing your trees. So the drip line of the tree, the surface underneath the tree should actually not be trafficked. No paths, no mowed lawns, no parked cars. You want your understory shrubs that are happy under tree. Here I have coffee berries and Douglas iris and some native onions and some Festuca californica and other plants and Ribes viburnifolium, other plants that are found naturally under oak trees if you go on a hike. So what happens is, as we learned from Doug Tallamy, caterpillars eat leaves, birds eat the caterpillars or feed them to their young. When a caterpillar turns into a chrysalis or pupates, if they pupated up here in the tree, they would be a sitting duck and really instantly eaten by birds. So they generally drop down and either bury into the soil or hide into the leaf litter that's hiding under your understory plants. And they pupate under there and finally emerge as adults in order to repeat the life cycle to provide more bird food and more biodiversity of insects. So you want to think of a tree as a whole ecosystem, at least to the drip line of the tree. You can, here I have a path over here, but this tree is well behind it. And the other thing that trees do in your landscape is they actually work as natural irrigation devices. So a mature oak like this doesn't need any water from me. It's going to reach down to the water table and actually share that water laterally. So it's going to bring up the water from down deep, and it's either going to share it root to root or through little bridges of the mycorrhizae fungi that are in the soil. So they're considered them as irrigation devices as we're hoping for rain and dealing with drought. So callascape.org is a wonderful site if you want to learn about different plants, and they also have a planting guide. So they have a diagram of the oaks with the deep moisture and the endomycorrhizae fungi and the ectomycorrhizae fungi with connections to, say, a shrub like a toyon or coyote bush, my personal favorite. Lots of native sages and buckwheats that are great pollinator plants because of their flower cover. And the sugar bush, which is called Rus ovata, which is a really, really pretty shiny shrub. So when you have supported your new plants that you're going to plant now in October, perfect timing, for 1 or 2 summers, you can reduce irrigation to once every 2 weeks, once a month, and in dire situations, even stop irrigation to some parts of your garden. So that is one fantastic aspect to considering native plants. And that's what actually got me into native plants in 1983. When we moved to Mill Valley, people were still complaining about the drought of the 70s when the water district said no irrigation for lawns, and people were complaining about their dead landscapes. And I looked up at Mount Tam and I'm seeing all these live green, wonderful plants with no irrigation. I'm like, maybe natives are the way to go. And I've stuck with that ever since. So next year will be my 40th year of planting natives. So I actually did not give credit to this photograph because I didn't want to hurt that person's feelings in case that person's in the audience. And how do you put a price tag on a beautiful tree canopy like this, but this is a way not to plant a tree or not to plant around a tree. So I'm not sure if this is turf or this is plastic contributing to the microplastic crisis, but they've covered up the base of the tree. And they don't have any understory native plants that grow naturally under trees in the forest. So anything that drops down is going to be killed. So it's not going to support life for next year. Plus, roots are evolved to deal with being in the soil, to be wet, to alternating with dry, and to deal with all the soil microorganisms and the invertebrates down in the soil. And they can deal in that environment. The above ground parts of the plant are not, cannot accommodate soil conditions. So this tree is going to be in trouble in short order, in my opinion. So I like plants or trees as part of an ecosystem and think of them as a unit with the tree and the understory. So here's another tree. It does have its base revealed, so they haven't covered up the base, but they put it in a paved area under the tree. So it looks pretty, but in my mind, the paved area can be where the furniture is, because who wants to move the furniture every time you mow? And this can be part of the shrubbery having native low-growing plants, ground covers that are used to being under trees. So we really do want caterpillars nibbling at your leaves, believe it or not. An oak tree can actually tolerate exfoliation and grow back, which rarely happens, but it's going to make for that whole ecosystem robust. So here's a black oak, Quercus collegii, and it does have the base not covered up, and it does have bare ground before I started planting around it. And the bare ground actually is a good place for native bees to dig their holes into it. But you really don't want to cover up the base of a tree. The only thing roots are not good at defending themselves against is, of course, gophers. So I'm hoping that trees can evolve some gopher remedies too. That would be ideal. So the leaf litter is actually part of the soil that's going to be developed. So the O layer, that's the letter O, not the number 0, but it's called the organic layer. And if you add it to your own garden, that would be mulch. If it's added because of dropping leaves, twigs, and petals and stuff like that, it's called duff, D-U-F-F, duff. But it's the start of soil formation. And the deeper and deeper you go, you get more and more to the rocks. And roots in healthy soil, generally go like this diagram to 30 inches, but there are roots that can go down 20 feet. And I kind of laugh about thinking about double dig gardening and stuff like that. I mean, nobody in their right mind is going to dig down even 30 inches. But if roots are down there and the mycorrhizal fungi, hyphae are down there, you're basically the same as digging in compost down deep. So you want healthy soil for deep roots, and that's going to be your replacement for physical digging. And if you don't dig, then you're not going to disrupt those mycorrhizal fungi. The other cool thing in healthy soil is that these roots are leaky. Their job is to hold the plant in place. We saw uprooted trees in Florida. It's just unbelievable with a hurricane, but they generally hold the tree in place. And they also bring water up. And water, carbon dioxide, and sunlight are the 3 ingredients of photosynthesis to make the sugars, to make cellulose, to make food and fiber and structure. But they also leak out soil exudates. So it's not like an accidental leakage, it's actually secreted sugars and other chemicals to feed bacteria and fungi that are in the soil that fetch the plant water, minerals, et cetera, nitrogen. So these deep roots are really important, both physically to hold the plant up and get water, but also to bring in all the nutrients that a plant needs besides water and carbon dioxide, all the minerals. So that's very cool. So we know why we want to grow plants in the garden, native plants in the garden, and that there's so many to choose from, 6,000 in California. How do you choose them? You can get inspiration from art. So one of the more beautiful shrubs in our compendium of plants is the manzanita. And it's stunning. It has red bark, curvy branches. It's an evergreen. And there are many, many paintings of manzanita. And the real plant is just as beautiful. So the scientific name is Arctostaphylos manzanita. So Arctostaphylos is the genus, and there's lots and lots of species within that genus. Manzanita is one of those species, and it's pretty big, but there's low-growing ones also. And I can't imagine how old you'd have to be to have one of these in your garden. It would have to have been there before you moved in, because I think this is a pretty old plant. But even young plants are stunning. So they prefer sun, they're very drought tolerant and don't need supplemental water. They're the ones that impressed me on the south bank of Mount Tam after a multi-year drought, growing fine. And they're just plain beautiful. So in your garden, this might be one that had some fire damage and it's crown resprouting, but the beautiful branch structure is amazing. It does shed its bark, so that's why it's so shiny. The branches are so shiny. It's not furrowed and deep like, say, a cork oak. Emerald carpet is a ground cover. Arctostaphylos sunset is a mid-sized shrub. It's a naturally found hybrid, and it really does well in the garden. And then, of course, the standard, or the is the manzanita, which really could stand in as a small tree in a small garden, and it would be a beautiful accent plant. In February, it has bell-shaped flowers that face down, so that when it rains, the pollen and nectar is not washed out, and the Anna's hummingbirds are really going to enjoy poking its beak into each and every little flower to get a slurp. And then it has red berries that look like little tiny apples later in the year. It's not in the rose family, it's in the Ericaceae family and the heath family. There are other beautiful plants, and the next one I chose is flannel bush. Here's a painting, a psychedelic painting of a flannel bush, and these are real flowers. This is a real native plant. It's a large shrub to a small tree and has fuzzy leaves and these incredibly bright flowers. And here is a FREMONTODENDRON californicum in the wild. Nobody is watering this plant. It is, you can see this dry landscape. It is amazing that it is literally covered in flowers. So if you have an area on a slope and you've not irrigated that area, that is where you should plant it in the fall. Maybe give it some water a couple times the following summer, but then no irrigation. If it's in normal irrigation, it's in range of normal irrigation, it will actually die. It really, the roots cannot tolerate that warm, wet soil in the summer. Must get a fungal disease or something like that, but it really wants a dry environment, which is amazing. There's a group of FREMONTODENDRONs. If you're driving down 280 on the peninsula on the road cut on the west side, and in the early summer, they're covered with flowers. It's pretty impressive. Some people get a little tired of yellow flowers, and the plant has been hybridized, and there's some orange varieties. You can go with your California poppies with the orange, and also comes in slightly different sizes, but they can be pretty sizable. They're going to take up a lot of room. So if you have a dry bank that's been a problem, consider a flannel bush. The biggest California native flower is this poppy, the Motilia poppy, or the Rhamnia coulteri. There's a painting of the flower, and it is sometimes called the fried egg plant, because you can imagine the white of the egg frying in your cast iron skillet with the yellow yolk. And here's another poppy that is actually growing in the wild, no irrigation, covered in flowers. And they are really, really pretty plants. There's Medalia poppy outside the Sloat Garden Center in San Francisco, the one on Sloat, that you can see through the upper windows. The flowers are kind of peeking in saying, I'm here. But it's also one of those plants, once it's established, and if you can get it out beyond where the root system is big enough that the gopher won't kill it with one bite, you're going to have a lot of beautiful flowers to reward your gardening activity with. It can get a little scraggly in the summer, so we call that drought deciduous. But my message is no one can be beautiful all the time. A more contained plant that's worth consideration is the bush anemone, or the Carpenteria californica. It's also white with yellow centers. It's a little more traditional looking, beautiful 6-foot shrub. So the flowers are at eye level. And it's funny because next week is hydrangeas, and it is in the hydrangea family. So plant families are large groups of plants. There's what, 300,000 named species of plants on the planet, and about 300 plant families. 100 plant families are represented in California for California native flora. And so plant families are huge, lots and lots of plants in each plant family. But it'll be interesting to see if the hydrangea talk includes the Carpenteria, because they're beautiful plants. The recommendation is to plant a little grove of them, to plant 5 or 6 in a group rather than have it isolated. Let it support each other. So here's a bush anemone, a Carpenteria californica. Actually, I should have italicized that. When you're writing the scientific name of a plant, the genus is capitalized and the species name is all lowercase, but it actually should be italicized. And if you are reading this in English, they're letters that are in the English language. But if you're a student in Japan studying botany and you're going to study this plant, the Carpenteria californica, and you've got a Japanese textbook with Japanese hiragana, katakana, it will actually switch to Carpenteria californica. And same with Latin America, Europe, Asia, everywhere. So it's a universal language, the naming of plants and animals, the binomial naming system, so that everyone in the whole world can know what plant or animal you're talking about. So a little partial shade if you're inland, otherwise it can be in full sun. And it's not native to the Bay Area, it's native to the eastern part of our state, but since it's so beautiful, it's been brought into the horticultural trade and is a garden plant that also happens to be a California native. That's, again, beautiful. So finally, you don't need to buy a plant, you can buy a packet of seeds. And I'm amazed that my stupid little phone took this picture. So I really like the combination of poppies and lupins. The poppies were started with a packet of seeds and now reseed in the garden. The lupins happen to be native to this site, my yard, but you can certainly add lupins. And the color combination is just stunning. This one happens to be Lupinus bicolor, and this spring was a really strong spring for that lupin. And here's an example of that. So October is a great place to plan your spring wildflowers. So take out all the weeds, and you want to rake the soil just a little bit to get the seeds in contact with soil. When you think about nature, these seeds dropped back in May and June. And so they've had 5 and 6 months to work themselves into that top 1/4 inch of soil, the ones that aren't, eaten already. And so they don't want to be on top of the leaf litter. They want to have contact with the soil, and then wait for the rain and see how many wildflowers you get in the spring. So there's lots and lots of beautiful California native wildflowers. Gilia capitata is a periwinkle blue that's really pretty. 5-spot is a white flower with 5 spots of dark purple at the center, and it's picture perfect. And there's many, many more that are in wildflower packets. So when we were kids, the primary colors were yellow and red and blue, but people that work in wavelength theory have the CMY color wheel, which is yellow, magenta, and cyan. And to me, a lot of these California native wildflower combinations really fall into this color wheel a lot better than, say, the straight primary colors, and a lot more sophisticated and beautiful. So periwinkle and California poppy orange, you can go wild with color combinations, and they're going to be different every year. Every spring is going to have different strengths of different wildflowers. And here's one of my sayings: a happy, healthy, thriving plant is going to look better in any color than a struggling one. So if you're hooked on having one plant, I just have to have an X, and it doesn't like your garden, hopefully it'll like someone else's garden, but try to find the plants that have their happy space in your garden. And that is experimentation, planting 3 or 4 or 5 different species in different areas of your garden that seem likely, and then augmenting the ones that are particularly healthy and even propagating on their own, which would be really cool. Oh, sorry, Sloat, you don't have to buy a second plant if it's propagating on its own. So I still see advice in gardening columns about deadheading flowers, which I don't really understand, because the flower isn't dead. The petals are basically the neon sign on Route 66 of the diner, eat here. They have signals to insects, to the pollinators, to come pollinate. Once the flower is pollinated, they don't really want to attract another set of pollinators. They don't want to give up more pollen and more nectar that takes work to make. They want that pollinator to fly off to the next flower. And so they want to drop their petals and go, oh, nothing to see here. This diner is closed. And it has a whole second part of its job to make seeds. It wants to make seeds for the next generation of plants, and wants to make seeds to feed nature. Many plants make 1 million seeds in order to reproduce itself once. So 999,999 seeds go to all the other things in nature. They're going to eat those seeds. So, so I don't deadhead. And I just love it when I see these perfect little holes in petals. So here's a bumblebee, but our California native ground nesting bees actually, and cavity nesting bees, will cut perfect little holes in leaves and flowers and make room dividers for their offspring. So they'll make a pollen loaf, gather enough pollen, squish it together with nectar to make a loaf, put an egg on top of that, put a room divider, and make another pollen loaf, another egg, and a room divider. So this bee happens to like orange, and other bees like other colors, but I really love seeing holes in leaves and pollen. Our seed capsules are interesting shapes and really fun. If you touch a California poppy seed capsule when the seeds are completely mature, it will break open with great energy and disperse the seeds out, flying out. So if you're going to collect your California poppy seeds to make a bundt cake, let's see, this would be a lemon, almond, poppy seed bundt cake. You would have to collect the mature seed, carefully put it in a paper bag, and then shake it and let all those seeds explode in the paper bag. Because if you try to collect it without putting in a bag, they're going to explode and go all over your garden, which is not a bad thing. But if you're not absolutely sure that your bundt cake is edible because you're using California native poppy seeds instead of red seed poppies, you can bring it to any Sloat Garden Center and we will test its edibility. So beyond deadheading is dead planting. So I dead plant weeds. Any weed in my garden I try to scoop out. But here's a poppy that would look dead. It sort of lays down this sort of hula hoop skirt of dead branches, but regrows in the center. So this was my August flush of poppies in an area that had no irrigation. So if a plant, it's kind of like the old Monty Python line, I'm not dead yet. So I am pretty generous with plants, native plants. And if they look dead, they might not be, they might give me a second flush. So I give them the benefit of the doubt. The other thing is that it's trapping leaves with the wind, so it's creating more of that O horizon for future healthy soil. Van Gogh, painted irises. So another gorgeous California native plant. He didn't paint native irises. He painted irises, probably originated in Turkey, actually. But we have California native irises. So an inspiration for art are irises. And they are great plants in the garden because you can ignore them most of the year and be delighted every spring. And they will spread with rhizomes. So our California native iris, one of them is called the Douglas iris. And it's a beardless iris because who wants an iris that doesn't know how to shave? And look at the range of the Douglas iris. It's exactly where most of us are living. So it's generally going to be happy in your garden, and they're stunning. So there are some hybrids. You can go to the peaches and the whites and the dark purples. This would be a more traditional color, but you can see this veining pattern and coloration. So if you're a watercolor artist, you can really be inspired by the Douglas iris. And that's one plant that's happy under oaks and beautiful. So you can have two beautiful plants, oaks and irises, and provide that under tree sanctuary site for insect pupation. This is a crazy flower that I don't think gets enough attention because it's so beautiful. It's called Clarkia consina. Here I did it correctly. I uppercase for the genus, lowercase for the species, and italicized it. It's called red ribbons, and it's named, Clarkia is named after Lewis and Clark. But it is a crazy flower because generally before a flower opens up, it's a bud and it has sepals around it, and the sepals peel open and then the flower emerges. When these sepals peel open, here's a side view. They stay attached at the tip. So it's kind of like if you took a banana and kept it attached to the tip and kind of split the skin back to eat the banana. It's like that. So it's this crazy contorted flower. So I'm convinced that Lewis and Clark didn't see this Clarkia. There are other Clarkias because here's the track of Lewis and Clark, and here's the range of Clarkia consina. It doesn't quite go up as north, but it got the genus name. It's related to the Clarkias that Lewis and Clark collected on their expedition in 1803. But it is endemic to Northern California, and it's beautiful. Annie's Annuals grows this also, and seeds are available from Larner Seeds by mail. So here's a stunning grouping of Clarkia consina. I've actually never grown them this densely. I don't know how Dave does this, but maybe we should talk to Dave. Oaks have been an inspiration for art, and here's a painting by Gustave Courbet, and it is a keystone species. Keystone species means it supports hundreds of species of insects, birds, and mammals. And so you have one species of tree that gives a lot of benefit to the whole rest of the ecosystem. So it's considered a legacy tree, and the best way to start an oak tree is from acorns. So walk around your neighborhood, find the prettiest oak trees, and plant those acorns. Everyone's concerned that oaks are huge and that their garden is too small. But if you look at California as a whole, there are actually 36 species of oaks. And this oak happens to be bonsai, so it's ridiculously tiny. But there are shrubs that are in the oak family, Quercus dumosa, and they're medium-sized shrubs to small trees. I'm not even going to try to say that word, Berberidifolia. And then the full-sized oaks that we see on our hikes in open space Quercus agrifolia, Quercus lobata, Quercus collagii. There's a lot of beautiful oaks. So if you go on a hike, an oak hike in a park or with CNPS, California Native Plant Society, you can get some experts to point out the different species of oaks and collect acorns in your neighborhood, so you know that they're hyper local. Doug Tallamy, last week's speaker, wrote a book, Nature's Best Hope, in 2020. In 2021, he wrote The Nature of Oaks, which follows the activity. Plants have activities, they have jobs, nature jobs, of an oak through the year, starting with October and going through the following October. I planted acorns when my son was 5. He was playing soccer. And so while he was running around the soccer field, I was running around the area around the soccer field, stuffing acorns in my pockets. And by the time he went to college, those young trees were as tall as the house. So here's for oaks. This is near my house. So look at the total size of the tree. You can look it up in your slope garden site or Calscape, but don't plant a 60-foot tree in a 30-foot site and get this PG&E haircut. Looks like this oak tree needs another trim, because it's a 60-foot tree will not get to 30 feet faster than a 30-foot tree. So be size appropriate, and all the information that we have about plants is going to guide you better and not have flails like this. The infrastructure bill, I guess, got modified but passed. Here's an oak seedling that I put in a pot rather than direct sowed. But here you have 3 or 4 leaves, and you're thinking that's smaller than most weeds in my garden. This is a tree pot, so it has grooves down so that the roots don't go round and round in a circle, and has large air holes in the bottom, so that's called air pruning. And this little tiny seedling put this many roots in the ground. So you can see how much more successful putting acorns in the ground is. But I do both ways. I plant acorns and I plant seedlings. If you're outside your fenced area, I have used deer fencing. I'll get some T-posts and pound them into the ground for them and put wire around in a circle. So if you get 20-foot length of wire fencing, it's going to make about a 6-foot diameter circle, so the tree can grow up. And as soon as it's over deer nibbling height, then you can take down the fence and put it up for some other oaks. So here's a drive in the summer. So all these ugly weeds are non-native European winter annual weeds. And all those green blobs in the hillside are all native oaks that are surviving the summer with roots down to the water table. These oaks are providing lateral irrigation, but they're also actually doubling the effective rainfall because they're doing evaporative transpiration. They bring up water from the ground, and when they do photosynthesis, their stomata is open. They're bringing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, water from the roots, and sunlight to perform photosynthesis. Well, water can evaporate out those stomata too, and turning liquid water to vapor water consumes energy, lowers the temperature, and increases the moisture. So trees are really important for the micro environment around the trees. And so plant them. Pasture land, here I'm in Sonoma. You can see some beautiful mature oaks, but I'm not seeing any 2 and 3 and 4 foot oak seedlings because the cows are going to trample them. So a little bit of fencing is going to protect some oak seedlings. So you need a succession planning if you've got rangeland. And these oaks are going to produce 1 million acorns, more than 1 million acorns during its lifetime. And it's just humbling to think that not even one of those acorns is going to make it unless it's protected with a fence. Or in the old days, it would have been protected. So you'd have Thule elk here, but mountain lions chasing them around. You wouldn't have the intensity of grazing that you have without the mountain lions moving animals around. So I want to encourage native plants and more familiarity with plants, have them more approachable and have them more desirable because of their characteristics and their beauty. So start at the Slope Garden Center, explore other choices on a website called calscape.org. That's Landscaping California with Native Plants. Every county around here has a chapter of the California Native Plant Society, and they have hikes in the fall and in the spring with expert field biologists and botanists and hobbyists that have been doing this for decades, and they're going to be really intimidating because they know so much. But you can get a heads up on some beautiful plants. And I'm getting a kick out of reading lots of articles in Bay Nature magazine. So I'm giving a shout out to that magazine because it has really cute, interesting articles by wonderful authors. So ready for questions?
Hi, that was amazing. I'm so inspired right now. I think, well, as you know, this is like the really exciting time of the year for gardeners, and I am totally like mentally sort of planning, what am I gonna do? And thank you for that. I'm really inspired. I haven't grown the Carpinteria, and I'm gonna try that this year. And a bunch of other stuff. I want to do like a whole thing of Romnea. I've had some, I've heard that their roots can be really sensitive, so I've had some trouble getting those started. And then also I have this vision of poppies everywhere and lupins, and I want to have what you have in your garden, but I've literally dumped, I don't know how many pounds of poppy seeds in my garden, and like I don't have that. I don't have that field of poppies, and I don't know what I'm doing.
It's interesting because I mean, obviously I've got poppies everywhere, so their seeds are going to get splattered everywhere. And where they regrow is the driest, rockiest part. They grow in the paths and in the place that is not covered in compost or mulch or whatever, like, you know, I've got an asparagus bed or, you know, some rhubarb or whatever. Anywhere that's rich that I'm growing vegetables, no poppies.
Interesting.
That is tough and dry and literally cracks in the ground, like, you know, like you're spreading the seeds out and it looks like a moonscape. I mean, just a horrible environment. That's where I get the poppies once it rains. So maybe try the edges of the really unembellished areas.
Okay, that's a good tip because I've been putting them all in my garden, and then I put like a layer of compost over them because I feel like I need to whatever. So okay, I'll do that. I'll definitely do that this year.
I mean, because that you know, the dead plant that I didn't kill and then it regrew. I mean, that's in basically a gravel pathway. And there's no vegetation there, none. And of course, I just walk around it because it's like, okay, it's a poppy, you know?
Yeah.
I need my poppy seed pancake, you know? No, just kidding.
Yeah. No, and I did like how you said that we're happy to taste your poppy bread for you. Question about pollinators. You did talk about, and they were asking specifically about Carpinteria, but I'm also curious, like if you chose like your top 3 native pollinator plants that you like to use, what would those be?
So the word pollinator, you basically want flowers for many, many months of the year. So not just spring bloom, but actually in the fall. So actually an important pollinator plant, believe it or not, is coyote bush. It flowers in the fall, whereas all our spring wildflowers are gone. So there's pollen and nectar. So I have this coyote bush, you know, near the barn, and it was covered in, I don't know how many species of bees, like lots and lots of species of bees, just covered. So it's dioecious, 2 houses, boy plants and girl plants. Botanists always have a cow when you say that, but that's okay. So some plants, the flowers only make pollen, and some plants, the flowers only make seeds. So it guarantees cross-pollination because the bee has to go from one plant to another. And when the seed is mature, it has a white filament on it, so it can blow away like a dandelion. So that's why they call it a coyote bush, because it looks like a white shaggy coyote. The girl plants, the boy plants have little yellow flowers. But so for pollinator gardens, I think of having spring flowering, summer flowering, fall flowering plants so that there's some pollen and nectar available all the time. And because these bees are not going to be invited in the grocery store to get their food, they're going to get their food from your garden. So it's more of a diversity of timing that's more important to me than, you know, which plants, because, you know, flowers that need pollination, you know.
Right. Yeah, I heard that too. And I planted a coyote bush in my garden for that reason. And I like the leaf too. I think it's a
Yeah.
pretty plant. It's a nice green leaf. Obviously low maintenance. There is a question about with regard to fire in the coyote bush, but and I think this is true for most native plants. I don't know what you would say, but I'm under the impression that if you keep them pruned, so there's a lot of, you know, you have that newer leaf growth and whatnot, then they tend to be fire safe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, I think it got unlisted as a danger. To me, junipers are really fire prone because they're high oil plants.
Yeah.
They're dangerous. But a lightly irrigated native plant that uses 1/3 of the water of a traditional non-native ornamental plant can actually catch embers and reduce fire danger. And that data came from Greg Rubin, who's a landscape contractor in San Diego, because they have a fire season 12 months of the year, that actually did some published studies. So you're right. Pruning out, you know, dead wood, keeping it, refreshing it, taking out, say, a quarter of the branches so that you've got young growth all the time. And, you know, water June, July, and August, 3 times a year, once the plant's established. It's not much.
Yeah, well, and that's a good, so a follow-up question would be in regards to water. So one of the reasons why we like this time of year to plant, obviously, is because the rain is going to come and help offset the water budget a bit for the plants. But when you're trying to get these plants established, what do you do in terms of water once the rains have stopped? So do you have advice on that?
So shrubs and trees probably will need watering once a week for the first summer, maybe once every other week for the second summer, and again, maybe 3 times a year after that. If they're happy, if you've planted them in a place that they're happy and they're growing and they don't look stressed, so you've got new growth, you know, you can tell when a plant's stressed, like it'll actually shrink, you know. It's just like, this place is not the right place for me. Like, get another plant for that place or put that plant in another place. So having it perfect in its environment. So a little more support the first summer, less, and down to pretty minimal support for some of these. I mean, California, you know, does have plants that grow by rivers. I mean, there are some rivers. I mean, I was out at Point Reyes 2 weeks ago and the stream was still flowing. So there's going to be maples and ferns. I mean, there's going to be plants that accommodate to water and moisture and need moisture year round. But if you're choosing plants for to survive our summer dry climate, they need very little summer irrigation once they've got a root system. And that goes for planting 1-gallon plants, so it can have lots of nice, healthy new roots coming out rather than huge things.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And so, and I just actually, I've been inspired by people like Joan to convert my garden into well, I've planted 75 natives in the last year because I just went crazy. And that's what you do sometimes in the garden when you get inspired. And what I'm noticing is I'm actually waiting to see what it's going to look like next spring. So once I have that full year sort of growth, I feel like I'm gonna it's going to be that much less water. I'm going to see that much, the plants are going to be that much happier once they're established. So there's a little bit of a time investment, I would say,
Mhm.
but it's completely worth it.
And also shrubs and ground covers really limit your weeding, because if
Yeah.
you've got a ground cover, you may have some weeds right at the periphery, but underneath the plant, there are no weeds. I mean, it's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. What do you, I mean, because it's a native plant, do you really amend your soil a lot when you plant the plants, or no, you just stick it in?
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I think it's you gave that advice. You dig a hole. You don't want the hole, you want the hole to be the right depth, so that the crown of the plant is just maybe a ½ inch higher than the surrounding soil, but certainly not lower, but it can be wider. Fill it up with water, let it drain, fill it up with water, let it drain, fill it up with water, let it drain, and then plant it, and then backfill it with the soil that was removed and stuff like that. Because if you just plant it and water a little bit, that surrounding dry soil is going to wick it out and wick out that potted plant soil, and it's going to be a very traumatic transition to planting. So you really want an island of moist soil to plant it into, and your success rate is going to be higher, and your transplant failure rate is going to be lower, thank goodness, because there's nothing more frustrating than planting a plant and having it just go, eek, can't handle it. So yeah, there is water in the beginning, but no.
Yeah, that's great. No, you don't have to mix compost in or anything like that. Transplant food. No.
Yep.
Well, this is great. I feel like you must have covered a bunch of questions, because we don't have a ton of questions, but I do want to remind everybody that this is being recorded, and you will get a link. There's a follow-up link that comes out after the class with the links to the recording, and they'll be available on Tuesday, October 4th, both on our website and on our YouTube channel. This is always super fun to have you, Joan. I really appreciate your time and your expertise. I always learn so much. I hope everybody has it's a beautiful day out today. So I'm gonna go play in my garden, and I hope you all do too. Thank you again. Have a wonderful Saturday.
Good gardening. Ciao.
Bye.